cheap assets from distressed companies and seize this once-in-a-decade opportunity to buy gold, silver, and other mineral projects for pennies on the dollar. First Mining Finance Corp., trading on the TSX Venture under FF, a recently launched venture with the sole purpose to acquire advanced stage natural resource projects, and starting on day one with 18 projects, management has already identified over 60 additional projects to acquire. Learn more about First Mining Finance at futuremoneytrends/investright. Greetings and thank you for joining us at futuremoneytrends.com. I'm here with legendary investor Jim Rogers, also author of several books, including his recent book, Street Smarts, and Gift to My Children, A Father's Lessons for Life and Investing. Jim, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm delighted to be here, Daniel.
Jim, I want to cover four topics today. Hated regions, hated commodities, world opinion, and then a special portion about raising children in this environment. Let's start with hated regions. So I heard you recently positively talk about North Korea, and I think that's really cool. But I just don't know how in the hell I'm going to invest in it. Why do you think North Korea is a buy today?
Well, first of all, there is no market. There is no stock market there. So you have to go there and do things directly, which it turns out is legal. There's some things you can do in North Korea as an American citizen which are legal. There's some you cannot. You cannot go into the weapons business. You cannot go into the uranium business. But there's some things you can do. To my surprise, and there are many Americans there are even American Christians living in North Korea and doing business as they are overt Christians. I mean, they're not hiding the fact that they're Christians. They're quite open about it and have no problems whatsoever. There are many changes taking place. The kid has only been in power for 3 years. His father died at the end of 2011, and many dramatic changes are taking place. I mean, if you listen to American propaganda, you wouldn't know it, of course, but there are now 13 free trade zones in North Korea. You can go there and run marathons. They have international wrestling matches. You can take movie tours. You can take art tours. There are all sorts of things. You can go skiing. They now have an international ski resort. I have not been to it, so I have no idea of the standards. But my wife refuses to go. I keep insisting we should go, but we'll get there. So there are many things taking place. The Russians are pouring in. The Chinese are pouring in. I went to North Korea last August or September, up in the north, the very far north, and I came through the immigration facility, and it just opened, and it was already inadequate. They've had to start building a new one because there's so many thousands of people pouring in there. They're having to build a new bridge as well. The bridge and the immigration facility were just completed, and they've already started building a new one.
So in this case, do you try to find businesses that maybe they're listed in Russia or China that are going to do business with North Korea?
Yes, I certainly have. Unfortunately, I have not found anything where it's significant. North Korea is still a small country. It only has 20 or 25 million people. But soon there will be a unification with the South, says I. Not many other people say that. But once unification takes place, Korea will be the most exciting country in the world for a decade or two. 75 million people right on the Chinese border. Lots of cheap, disciplined, educated labor in the north, lots of natural resources in the north, huge amounts of capital and expertise in the south. I mean, it's going to be a very exciting country. It'll run circles around the Japanese, which is why the Japanese are against all of this. There are plenty of people against it, but it's going to happen just as it happened in Germany. North Korea today is where Myanmar was in 2010, or where China was in 1980. It's happening, and it's happening fast. Now, but if you want to go into business, if you want to open a restaurant, go there and do it. There are not many restaurants, I assure you.
Now, what about the North Korean people themselves? And my assumption as an American watching these documentaries and stuff on Netflix is that these are basically impoverished people. They're brainwashed and in a severe state.
I know. Well, when I was there, among other things, I went to a huge market, open market, with hundreds of stalls, hundreds of entrepreneurs, and thousands of customers. And they had all sorts of food. They had electronic devices that I didn't even know what they were. They were so advanced. Every alcohol you could conceive of, all sorts of products. I didn't see too many people starving in that market. It's interesting, there is a business of defectors, as you know, and I don't know the people, so I cannot comment, but I do know that there are thousands of North Koreans who leave North Korea every year, legally, legitimately, on missions, and they all go back. Huh. So you would think that if there's this horrible place which you described, you described reading about or watching, why do these people keep going back? They had Asian Games last fall in South Korea and Incheon. Several hundred North Korean athletes were there. Not a single one defected. They all went home. There are many students in Singapore and many other places. They all go home. I don't quite understand why they all going back to this horrendous place.
The son, as you probably know, went to college in Switzerland and lived there. And I would assume that, and maybe you can expand on you called him the kid, if he is actively trying to push North Korea to joining the rest of the world.
Well, I don't know the kid, but I do know that all this has started. These changes have started since he came into power. Yes, he did go to school in Switzerland. He knows there's something else out there. He's spent lots of years in a different world. But more important, or equally as important, his generals, when they were lower officers, they would go to Beijing or Moscow. There's no place else they could go. Now they go back to Moscow or Beijing, and they come home and they say, oh, my God, you won't believe what's happened in Beijing in the last few years. You won't believe what's happened in Moscow. And then they look around home, and nothing has happened. So they, too, know there's a different world out there, and that change can be positive. There's a black market in North Korea now. There's an internet. Well, first time I went there, I couldn't even take my mobile phone into the country, much less use it. Now people have mobile phones. People have internet. Not everybody, but it just started. All this is just starting.
Jim, I think you're taking contrarian views and investments to the next level, because if you're short the U.S. and long North Korea, this is certainly breaking for most contrarians.
But first, let me hasten to say I'm not short the U.S. In fact, the U.S. dollar's my largest currency position. So no, I'm not short the U.S.
In regards to Russia, it was kind of one of those markets you said for a long time you didn't want to touch. Is Russia now something you're interested in?
I was bearish on Russia for 46 years. I first went to Russia in 1966. I went to many of the Soviet countries in 1966 and came home saying this is going to be a disaster. So I was bearish for the next 46 years. But changes are taking place in Russia, not in others. I'm not bullish on Ukraine. I'm not bullish on, although I do find myself now being positive on Kazakhstan to my surprise. I see big changes taking place in former Soviet states, and some of them are very interesting, including Russia, on which I was bearish for decades, not years, decades.
Do you think it's to the investors' advantage to buy some of these natural gas and oil companies in Russia? You've got these commodities down significantly, priced in dollars, but here Russia, the ruble is also down dramatically. So you've got Russia doing, or these companies doing business in rubles, but essentially they're probably going to sell the oil and gas in euros, dollars, and renminbi.
Yes, I cannot really give investment advice, but there are plenty of opportunities. That may be one of them. I own the Russian ETFs. I became recently, or last September, I should say, a director of a Russian fertilizer company, which has the exact same characteristics. Their expenses are in rubles, and they sell in U.S. dollars. So, they're coining money at the moment, as are many other people. So it's I hope there are opportunities. I own the shares of the Moscow Stock Exchange, believe it or not. And even more remarkable, stocks at an all-time high. It's astonishing. This is the home of Stalin and Lenin. First of all, I'm shocked that I own it. But second of all, I can't believe it's making all-time highs, despite what you read in the papers.
For the Middle East, Iraq and Iran. If you could just comment on those two, if those are two countries that you're looking at, or if that you would be bullish on.
Well, if they raise sanctions on Iran, yes, I hope very much that I will start investing in Iran. It's a huge country with a glorious history, as I presume you know. It's not a glorious history in the last 30 or 40 years, but in the past 30 or 40 decades, well, even decades, yeah, and centuries. So if and when they raise sanctions, I hope that I start investing in Iran. It's a very young country. I think something like 60 or 70% of the people are under 35 years old. They don't particularly like walking around in abayas and the rest of it. They know about the outside world, and they want more of the outside world. Now, once you show people the outside world, like in North Korea, I mean, it's hard to keep these people down. People are fairly smart. It's like Russia. Once Russians started finding out about the outside world, that was the end of the Soviet Union. So that's will happen in Iran too. And if the sanctions are raised, that means that there's going to be peace, and that could be a very exciting country for investing.
Moving on to hated and out of favor commodities. So some of these commodities are trading below the cost of production. It depends which company and how they're mining it or producing it. But I just want to touch on several here, and just if you want to just give us your initial thoughts, what you think of it, if there's any kind of catalyst that investors should be taking a serious look. The first one is uranium.
Well, I would suspect that uranium probably should be bought now. I'm not an expert on uranium, but I had rather be a buyer than a seller. But that's just an off-the-cuff talking when I shouldn't be talking, when I don't know what I'm talking about.
Thank you for your brutal honesty. How about oil? I know you do know a lot about oil, and oil is a commodity most people, and we can all understand because it's the master commodity.
Well, it certainly is the most important, far and away, whether we like it or not. I had rather, well, oil has come straight up, as you know, here in the last few weeks. So I don't like to buy anything that's gone straight up. I would suspect it's going to test its lows sometime in the next few weeks. That's normally what happens when you have a total collapse. Then you have a bounce. Normally, I mean, this is the way markets work and have worked for hundreds of years. You have a big bounce, and then you test the lows. I suspect that would happen, but I'm the world's worst trader. I have no concept of how to time a market. I'm very bad at it. But I have noticed that that's the way markets have worked most of the time.
What about copper and zinc? Now, copper, of course, a big indicator for the economy. Zinc, the supplies are tight.
Yes, some of the base metals things are fairly tight. There's no question about that. Copper will be tight again. There's a lot of inventory of copper right now. But if you look at the mining, the fundamentals, copper is going to, if it's not in deficit soon, it will be in a couple of years. So I'm not a seller. I'm not a buyer or a seller right now. Mm-hmm. My main interest in commodities is in agriculture at the moment. But sure, copper is going to be back in deficit in the next 2 or 3 years, if not before.
I'm going to move on to the favorite commodities of probably people who follow you religiously. I've been looking at some of the blogs and stuff. Like there's some, I know they're probably not authorized blogs by you, but there are a lot of blogs, and people love to hear you talk about gold and silver. Now, I asked you about gold years ago, and you were bearish on it. And I don't know, it was probably $1,500 or $1,600 at the time. And of course, that was shocking to a lot of people because on one hand, you have come out with very strong views on the U.S. dollar and the sustainability of our debt. But then, as far as gold, you weren't bullish on it when it was kind of peaking there, where people thought where the S&P had just downgraded the U.S. Treasuries. So for gold and silver at these levels, I mean, now they've been brutalized for the past 4 years. Now, at these levels, is this a good entry point for gold and silver investors? Because my assumption is your downside is very limited at this point.
Well, you should never assume that about anything. If a stock goes from 100 to 10, it can still go down 100% if it goes from 10 to 0. So don't ever make such an assumption about anything. Yes, I was certainly, oh my gosh, I was certainly browbeaten a lot about gold back back in September of 2011, I was quite vocal that gold would be going down and staying down for a while. I mean, some of the gold blogs, they refused to even let me access them. I wouldn't, not that I particularly wanted to access them, but since they were bad-mouthing me and saying that I was demented and senile and had lost it, etc., the same guys who are still saying that gold can't go down, it will not go down, although gold is down quite a lot. And by the way, I should say I do not have a blog. You're right about that. They're unofficial blogs. They're people, they're supposed to note that I have nothing to do with the blogs, but I do not have a blog. Back to the point. I own gold, and I have never sold any gold. And also silver. I'm not buying gold at the moment. I've actually hedged some of my gold position, not all of it. I expect another chance to buy gold sometime in the next year or two or three, and if that happens, I hope I'm smart enough to buy a lot more gold. But I wouldn't buy it now.
Do you like the platinum and palladium precious metals here? Because I've seen some pretty interesting data, which you're probably fully aware of, is where 70% of it's coming from Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Russia. So you got these volatile areas and a very tight supply. And of course, again, it's another story where the miners aren't selling it for a price where they can make money. Do you like platinum and palladium here?
Well, if I had to buy a precious metal, I would rather buy palladium and maybe even platinum, but I don't have to buy precious metals, so I'm not doing anything with those as well, partly because they are always tarred with, the brush of gold or silver, rightly or wrongly. I mean, palladium is certainly a very, very almost purely an industrial metal, but it's tarred, it's grouped with precious metals, rightly or wrongly. So, no, I'm not doing anything with any of them at the moment. And by the way, you said that Zimbabwe, Russia, and South Africa are, what did you say, volatile countries?
Yes.
I'm not so sure that Russia's a volatile country anymore. I'm not so sure that South Africa even is. Zimbabwe could be when Mugabe dies, if he dies. I mean, it doesn't look like he's ever going to die. And if you ask him, he would tell you he's not going to die. But no, I don't consider two of those anyway so volatile anymore.
Well, I'll definitely take your opinion over mine. How many countries have you been to? Do you even have a count?
I do not have a count, but I know I've been to more than one.
Okay,
more than two.
Yeah. Well, I've probably been to about 4 or 5. So,
okay.
Jim, just last question on this sector in the commodities. When I look at the TSX Venture chart, you look at it the past few decades. You look at these juniors. I mean, my goodness. Every decade, this is about where they bottom. In fact, for gold stocks, you could say that they're lower than they've ever been, and the sentiment is worse than it's ever been. I mean, it seems like now is a pretty safe time to get into commodity stocks, but the junior resource sector. My reservation is the economy. It feels like the fundamentals aren't there, but when I look at charts like that, and I know you've said you're not a chartist, you're not a trader, but it does seem like you have a margin of safety with these things being slammed for the past 4 years.
Well, the word safe is not a word I ever use in the investment world. As I said before, if you invest in something at 100 and it goes to 10, you might think it's, oh, well, how much further down can it go? Well, the facts are it can go down 100%. From 10 to 0 is 100%. So I don't use the word safe ever in the investment world. I have noticed what you say about the gold stocks, silver stocks. I'm actually contemplating buying some. I'm a director of one that's gone from 80 cents to 2 cents, as a matter of fact, which is a pretty serious decline, as you can imagine. I haven't bought more of it. I haven't bought any of it, but I'm thinking about it. And I'm actually thinking about buying some of the others because, they can go up whether gold goes up or not. If gold just stops going down, you could have an opportunity in some of those companies. I haven't bought them, but I've noticed the same thing you've noticed, and I am looking.
Do you also notice where we're in a situation where the dollar chart is going straight up? So it almost seems like a good setup. Commodities are going straight down, dollars going straight up. I mean, both of those are are likely reversible, right?
Well, as I said before, the U.S. dollar is my largest currency position on the long side, although And I too notice what you've noticed. I do know that everybody's bullish. I mean, the statistics on the bulls on the dollar are staggering. Rarely do you ever see so many bulls on anything. So I have to start worrying about my dollar position. By the way, the reason I'm long the dollar is it's a horribly flawed currency with huge problems facing it. The U.S. is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. So there are many problems with the U.S. dollar. I own it because I see more problems in the world, and when there are problems, many people flee to the U.S. dollar. They think it's a safe haven. Well, it's not a safe haven, but since people think it is, I own the dollar. I expect the dollar, when the problems really get bad, to go even higher. It may even turn into a bubble, at which point I'll have to sell. But in the interim, and I hasten to tell you again, I'm the world's worst trader. I've been thinking about cutting back on my dollars because there's so many bulls on the dollar at the moment. But it's gone up a lot. I mean, look at the ruble, look at the Japanese yen, look at the euro.
Yeah.
I mean, it's astonishing. The Canadian dollar, the Australian dollar. It's amazing how much the U.S. dollar's gone up.
Jim, I have two more topics I want to talk about. We have about 10 minutes left. World opinion and children. I'm going to be selfish, and I'm going to ask you about children first because I have a 5-year-old son, a 3-year-old daughter, and a 10-month-old daughter.
You're a wise man. Daughters are better than sons, and there's a huge shortage of females developing in the world. Well, so anybody who has daughters is doing a very wise thing.
Well, I didn't plan it that way, but that's the way it is, so I'm happy about it. But you've stated it publicly that you've moved to Singapore, you've taught your kids Mandarin, and I want to know what else have you done regarding education or anything that another parent who has young children, such as yourself, could proactively do that you are also doing, in addition to, with the exception of moving to Singapore and Mandarin. What else can parents do?
Well, yes, I moved here. Well, my children, and both of my children are native speakers of Mandarin now. They speak like natives with English and with Mandarin. And I guess not everybody can do that, but everybody should, at a very early age, start their children with 2 languages. Doesn't matter what they are. I mean, Spanish, I would say Spanish is, if you can't do Mandarin, do Spanish or Portuguese, but pick a language, because especially in their lifetimes, they've got to understand 2 languages. They're going to be at a very, very serious disadvantage to most people in the world. So that would start there. I'm trying to teach my children about saving. I'm not trying to teach them about investing. But when they were born, I got each of them several piggy banks. They have a piggy bank for U.S. dollars, one for euros, one for Chinese renminbi, etc. I'm not trying to teach them to be currency speculators, but I want them to know, A, the value of saving, and B, that there's more than one kind of money out there in the world. And that's all. I'm just planting this awareness in their minds at the moment. That's all. I'm trying to certainly teach them arithmetic and to read. But we one of the other reason we moved to Singapore was because the schools here are extremely demanding and rigorous and advanced. My children have more homework than I had in 12 years in the U.S., and the standards are very, very high. It may even be too high in some ways, in some cases, but that's another thing that I wanted for my children. In America, they teach you self-esteem. Well, in Asia, you got to earn self-esteem in order to have self-esteem, which is something that I wanted. I grew up that way, and I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I'm trying to teach that sort of thing to my children. You have to earn your self-esteem. Doesn't do any good for me to sit here and say, oh my gosh, you did a great job on that math test if they got 70. They got to get 90 or 95 for somebody to say you did great on that math test. So those are some of the things that I'm trying. Discipline, I guess, is part of what I'm saying. I'm trying to teach them the value of money, and money is not free. And I'm trying to teach them discipline, self-discipline. And I'm trying to teach them to beware of the boys. I know boys can be bad boys.
Well, a good way, I know in my town, I don't know how it is over there in Singapore, but we had a father-daughter dance, of course. So the best way to teach about boys, my guess is, as a young father, is to show them how a man is to treat a woman. I want to know if you had any fun games or anything that you did with them to either teach them about saving or make investing fun, or I mean, have you tried to introduce Monopoly to them or anything like that?
We play Monopoly periodically. To repeat, I have not tried to teach them about investing at all. They have this vague concept that their father's an investor or something like that, but they don't really know what that means. And if and when it's time, if and when they want to learn about investing, sure, I have every intention, but I don't want to impose that on them, because I have seen too many children where the parents have imposed something where they've reacted against it. Now, there are other stories where people impose things and the children became great tennis players or whatever. But you have to love it no matter what you do. And so I'm not imposing anything. But I am teaching them about saving. They have to save their money. You know, we're going down to they have these piggy banks. Next weekend, we're going down to the big bank to transfer money from the piggy banks to the real bank.
How about a college degree? Or are you going to be emphasizing that to your children? And then, as a follow-up, do you think a degree is the same, of the same value if you're living in Asia versus the U.S.?
Well, the degrees everywhere are not what they used to be, because they're so common now. You know, if you go to look at the UK, which was the richest, most powerful country in the world for over 100 years, there were only 3 universities, essentially, four or five, let's say, you know, in the UK. And there's still very, very few universities in the UK. They only started having universities after they went into decline. The universities were supposed to save them. Well, they've gone further into decline. So I don't know. I know that the university education and degree is much, much, much more common than it was before. It's still, everybody wants to get one, and many people do get them, although their worth has gone down. I certainly expect my children to go to university, but if they tell me that they want to, I'm not going to sit and say, you must go to university. I mean, when I grew up, it was never even questioned that I would go to university. Any of my siblings, we would all go to university. My parents had, my grandparents had. But I don't know, I hope I don't insist that my children go to university, because now I and the world knows there are many other ways to be successful and happy rather than going to university. But you asked me that in 10 years, or you asked me in 30 years. Ask me in 30 years.
Well, that's perfect. That'll lead us into world opinion. And I'm running short on time, so I'll try to make some of these questions quick. What do you think the U.S. is going to look like in 25 years versus what do you think China is going to look like in 25 years?
Well, certainly in that period of time, there have been more wars and global strife. Probably a big one, but in 25 years, just because that's the way the world has always worked. I would suspect that the U.S. will look a little bit like the U.K. did after it started going into decline. Maybe we won't be that bad unless we lose the war, which we certainly hope we don't. But in 25 years, the U.S. will show the signs of a nation in decline with staggering debts and not nearly the big savior on the hill that it has been for the last 100 years. I don't particularly like saying this, and I'm an American, a taxpayer and voter like you, but I have to deal with facts. China, of course, will be much stronger and richer. They may lose the war. I have no idea who will lose what wars are coming or who will lose them, but even if they lose the war or a war, which is unlikely, but if they should, I mean, look at what happened to Germany and Japan after they lost a war or two. They're on the rise, just as Germany was on the rise. Germany lost 2 wars, but now Germany is still one of the most successful countries in the world.
Are you more bullish on China or India?
China, much.
Okay,
India's, I own some Indian shares, but no, there's no comparison.
I've read some doubts on China's growth because of their demographics, where they're having to have like 400 million old people in the next 20 years. Have you come across this data? I'm sure you have, and why do you think that's not going to be a problem?
It is going to be. I mean, there is a problem. There are other countries that are in worse shape. If you look at Taiwan or Japan or other countries that are even worse shape demographically, and so we will see how it's going to play out. China has started reversing its one-child policy. They never should have done it in the first place, if you ask me, but that's history now. Yes, that there are going to be problems. America became the most successful country in the 20th century. On the way, we had a horrible civil war. We had 15 depressions with a D, had very few human rights, massacres in the streets, very little rule of law, and yet we still became a very successful country. China's going to have plenty of problems, including demographics. And India, too, will have problems. Their demographics are changing. They're better than China's as far as just raw numbers of birth are concerned. But both of them have serious problems. And back to a point I made earlier, both of them have a staggering shortage of girls developing. In some parts of India right now, you cannot find wives. It's a very, very serious demographic problem, the shortage of females in Asia. And the status of women in Asia is going to go through the roof, because whenever you have a huge shortage, you know as well as I do that the value goes up a lot.
Yeah.
1,000 years ago in Europe, there was a shortage of girls for many of the same reasons, and boys' families in those days paid dowries. Not the girls' family. The boys' family paid the dowry, because girls were short, in short supply, and you needed them. Women became heads of city-states. They ran a lot of companies. You know, the women became very, very powerful and popular in those days. But there was such a shortage.
Jim, in your lifetime, you've seen London switch over to the new financial capital, which is New York. What do you think is going to be the next center? Where's the new financial capital of the world?
Probably Shanghai. But before the Second World War, Shanghai was the most important financial center between New York and London. Second World War and Mao Zedong, of course, ruined all that. But it'll be again.
And last and final question, Jim. Before we close out, I just wanted to ask you about the U.S. and its decline. I believe you and I have talked about this in the past about the U.S. The potential for a hyperinflation or some type of currency crisis. And I want to know if you have seriously considered or thought about what the U.S. will do to pull a rabbit out of its hat essentially at the last minute. Could it bring about a new currency on the eve of a dollar run or a commodity-backed currency? You had mentioned a war. Is the war most likely?
Well, we've been having wars for thousands of years, so the idea that there wouldn't be a war in the next 25 years is pretty absurd. America's had a war almost every year, some big, some small, in the past 50 or 60 years. So, I mean, look at this guy in Washington right now. I mean, he loves war. He won the Nobel Peace Prize, I guess because he loves war so much. I don't know. The U.S., unfortunately, we're the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. I don't see it. Let me go back. No nation in history has gotten itself into this situation has gotten out of the problem without a crisis or a semi-crisis. Well, the U.S. is certainly going to have a crisis or two or three. I hope not in our lifetimes. I hope not in our children's lifetimes, but I'm afraid that's not very realistic. Most countries use exchange controls when things start going bad. Yes, some countries do just, throw out the old currency. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the old currency was just eliminated, and they issued new currency. That's very common when countries get into trouble. So yes, something like that will happen. We may have to have some kind of commodity-backed currency, gold-backed. I mean, maybe we'll try for gold. People have often tried for gold or silver throughout history. But the U.S., certainly currency controls will come. Certainly the currency will be much less valuable, and you and I and my children will have to learn that there are other things besides the U.S. dollar.
Jim, I'm going to have to send this interview to the CBO because in all of their projections for the U.S., they never factor in a new war over the next decade or 10 years, 20 years or 30 years. So
we have wars right now.
Yeah.
Tell them to open up the newspaper. Tell them to watch the television.
It's always missing from those projections.
Got all kind of wars going on. I mean, look at how much did we spend in Iraq? Staggering amounts of money. And what do we have to show for it? A disaster. Look at Hillary Clinton and with Egypt. our huge pals, the Egyptians. We spent staggering amounts of money. Now we got nothing to show for it. Libya, we quote saved Libya. Oh my God, we got to stop saving countries. It's costing us a huge amount of money and making the situations worse.
It's like every time they want to make something cheaper for us, they spread out the loan, and it's like, prices are going to go up for housing if you keep doing that.
Well, I guess about the only good thing is at least it helps Americans learn geography. We've learned so much geography since the Second World War because of all of our wars, starting with Korea and going on and on and on.
Jim Rogers, legendary investor and author. Check out Street Smarts. Check out A Gift to My Children, A Father's Lessons for Life and Investing. Jim, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
My
Thank you.
pleasure, Daniel. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, sir.